Garmagat Cahirlach and Garmagat to you all. I have been listening intently online for part of this and now here. And I really do think that this is one of the most refreshing and honest and valuable conversations we've had around Leaving Cert reform and what needs to be done. The combination, I suppose, of your own experiences and your own honesty around it is really appreciated, and it's certainly very valuable in the report that we're trying to do here, and in terms of trying to prioritise what we want to come out of this report, because what we wouldn't want to see is 100 different recommendations and none of them implemented. I think we need to focus on some key things. And I take in particular what you said yourself, Mr. Miley, in terms of the transition and it taking possibly 3 years to do this on a phased basis on what we need to do, and preserving the benefits of the Leaving Cert as it is, because it's easy for us to say, oh, it's all rubbish and we need to change it without actually concentrating on that. So it being quality assured, the continuity, the comparability, the equitable, and it obviously being state certified, I think is important. I have three main questions, and the first one is around the immediate challenge that faces us for the 80,000 students who are doing Leaving Cert this year, and you referred to the destabilisation of the results trend and the need to recalibrate. It was Dr. Ryan who said that. How do we do that? So that's the first question for all of you in the immediate term, and in particular the use of the random selection between applicants that has occurred. How do we get away from that? Because I think there's an absolute unfairness, and the sense of injustice from those who have been subject to that, I think is ferocious, and we need to deal with it. So that was my first question. Secondly, I want to look at the barriers to the cross-border student mobility in higher education, and the value of A levels and the Leaving Cert being very different. And what part do you think we should play as a reform of the Leaving Cert? So given consideration to how we compare the A levels done by students in the north to allow students to apply for the different colleges across the island. And thirdly, the HECA, Diarmuid, in yourself state that the Leaving Cert curriculum should be reformed to promote Irish as a living language. And could you, Professor Hegarty, expand on this further and outline the type of teaching students require? And do you believe that there may be an issue with teacher fluency? And would this type of change require much retraining for teachers? So they're my three main questions. Thank you.
Chairman, if I may, thank you, Deputy, I think for very incisive questions. To deal with the immediate challenge, I quoted some statistics earlier, but another one that we've put in our main submission to you is that in 2019, 13% of students achieved 500 points or more. That was 26% this year, so it was doubled. And I mean, and there's numerous other data points that you can look at that like when we say recalibrate, we have to level the curve here. We cannot. So what we cannot do next year is have another yo-yo where we dive down into a valley again. So I think whatever decisions are taken have to, I think, gently flatten the curve. Ideally it should not sit at the level it's at. It should come back down, but that, again, on a transitionary basis, that needs to be done. And I think that needs to be carefully calibrated. If we don't, we will continue disadvantage, because you're either disadvantaging next year's students or students from last year or the year before. So I think stability is absolutely critical, even if it's an imperfect system. Get it stable, and then make the changes on that. You mentioned the cross-border issue. I think our proposals around timing are important in this regard. Deputy Farrell, actually, if I may refer back, Chairman, asked earlier about the relative positions in other countries. So in Sweden, they get their results, the equivalent of the Leaving Cert results, on the 10th of June. Finland, end of May. Denmark, 5th of July. French baccalaureate, first or second week of July. And the German Abitur by the 15th of July. And of course, then the UK, as you're aware, is earlier than us. But more than that, UK universities make conditional offers to students, sometimes in March or April. Now, we have a real challenge with attracting Northern Ireland students, and we have a very low level of Northern Ireland students studying here. And I think the timing issue has a huge factor in that. Because you have a student in Antrim or in Derry who has a choice available to them maybe in May or June, and certainly by July in a UK university, and they're saying, you know, do I take it or do I wait and hope? And of course they take it. Some of our member universities made a considerable effort in pre-COVID years, going back 3 or 4 years ago, to recruit more students from Northern Ireland, and didn't succeed very well. So I think the timing issue is one factor to address that. I think there are other issues around A-levels, but I'm probably not best qualified to comment on that.
Okay, Mr. Ryan.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Deputy, for the questions. And they were razor sharp. I will absolutely support Jim's points on the ones. I won't labour all that again. I think, obviously, when we went down to the reform of the Leaving Cert a number of years ago, it was to try and get a greater granularity so we wouldn't get into the problem. COVID has obviously been the issue here. I think the unfairness is particularly for those who are presenting with results from previous years. So it seems to me that if things stay stable, there'll have to be some mechanism to accommodate that and to recognise that for a period. It won't be perfect, as Jim says, but I think to try and get the stability back in the system is the critical piece here. But the Leaving Cert has very highly respected standards. So I fully agree with Jim's point, going back to questions asked earlier about holding the Leaving Cert, though, as an element in the determinant, as I said, for higher education. But most likely because of those few high demand programmes. And this is my tail wagging the dog bit, you know, there might be an extra bit that's put on for those. On the questions of the cross-border piece, you know, I'm conscious of the work that the Royal Irish Academy did on higher education futures, which is very much an all-island piece, you know, and the Northwest, as you know, Deputy, was a big feature in that. And I think the fact that there is that all-island context and a shared island, I think there is a chance maybe to look under that again at this, because as Jim quite rightly says, the traffic actually is less than one would have thought, just given the situation at the moment. And obviously with Brexit, etc., you know, you're looking at questions of research collaboration, etc. So the dynamic has changed somewhat on that. Now, our registrars have looked at this. They do benchmark, and you know, it's possible that it's time to look at this again in that context. Thank you very much.
Deputy, I noticed earlier when we were earlier in the meeting, when you were actually zooming in online, we were looking at you taking assiduous notes. And, so just to return the compliment that you actually gave us at the beginning. Can I just say, in relation to two things. One, in relation to, you asked a question about random selection, and you asked a question about Irish language, so to reply to those. One, on random selection, it's a real problem, but I think we have to ask ourselves how many places are there available in medicine, and what's the limit on them? And the limit is the number of clinical places, okay? And we have to ask, well, how many of those clinical places are actually taken up by non-EU students? And it's a very significant number. Now, you know, the universities basically, you know, they have to effectively, to balance the books, okay, they have to effectively market medical education abroad, and they get very substantial fees for that. And maybe government might consider actually buying some of those places, and that would give more places, in fact, to Irish students. That's one solution to your random selection thing. Ultimately, it will, you know, it's a function of COVID. I think the swelling in numbers and random selection will ultimately. We may have that problem again if we have more continuous assessment, okay? But anyway, I hope it's a temporary problem. The question of Irish, I'm going to give you a very subjective answer to your question, okay? my French is much better than my Irish. I can conduct a meeting in French with the French team. I found myself as a team of one. One in a team of 6 in the project in Vietnam, and all the other 5 were French speakers. Naturally, the language of de travail was actually French, and which I had to live with, you know. But had the language, a working language for that had been Irish, I think I might have had more difficulty. And that's a terrible thing to have to say to fellow Irish citizens. And I believe it was because in the teaching of education of Irish, you know, that I experienced, I really didn't develop a love for the language. I developed an affection for French, okay, which improved. I had a great French teacher, you know. So what do we need to solve the problem? It's too late to solve the problem for me. Or maybe not. We never stop learning. But what do we need to solve the problem in schools? I think we probably need focus on oral Irish, okay? We need to focus on continuous assessment. And we need to focus on the richness of the Irish language. I don't know whether you heard, there was a poet, Maura, she died. Huh? Yeah, and there was a programme last night on RTE, the Arena programme, wasn't it, where we were talking about her work and talking about how she felt in the Irish language, the actual language of affection, the language of emotion, okay, it was so much richer in that regard. And I think we've really got to get that across to our young people in the teaching of Irish, so they actually understand the richness of the language. And they need to use it on a daily, on a daily basis. I think it would be helpful to help them if we had a measure of their skill, something like TOEFL or IELTS or something like that, and we said, okay, we're going to set a national requirement. I could go on I'm going on too long already, but I could go on at length really and answer your question.
You have a couple of seconds left if you want to ask a question, but I won't allow them to come in until the very end.
We need to have each individual contributor here on separate sessions, and we could fill it with, in terms of us expanding and developing things, I suppose, in terms of training of the Irish language teachers, how that needs to change. And what we need to do for that to create a love of the language rather than a fear of the language, which I think many of us have. I can identify with what you're saying in terms of not having the confidence to speak us Gaeilge.
Okay.